Today I'm joined by one of my favorite people in the world. He pastors a church in Clay City. Let me make sure I get it right. Clay City First Church of God, correct? In Clay City, Kentucky. And in the Zoom is my friend, Pastor Brad Epperson. How are you, man?
I'm doing great, Aaron. Doing good. Very
Yeah.
glad to be with you. Invite. Very
Awesome.
happy.
I'm so excited. We've been trying to do this for a little bit, and our schedules have just been like so different, I guess, for a minute. So I'm excited to finally get to sit down and chat with you a little bit. But I'm going to start off with a story for our listeners. Some of our listeners probably don't know you. So I'm going to share a story, but one of the stories, and you know this story, but my aunt, Ruth Ann, and I always spent our time at the church you pastored here in Campbellsville. Anytime our school was out, we were at that office and in the secretary's office, and she was always recording, doing the little cassette tapes, and you were in the office. And I remember always playing church with you. And I don't know if you remember this, but for some reason it came into my mind this week. I was when we always played the church, I always had you sing the hymn, "Glory, Glory, Glory."
Glory.
And I was like, why? I was trying to remember that, and I was like, man, I wonder if I could find that on like iTunes or YouTube or something, because I was like, how did that even go? But I remember we always went to an empty sanctuary, and you would sing that song, and I'd preach something really profound, probably not, and then we'd have an altar call, and you'd like warm my heart and act like you got saved or something. I don't know, but it was always a pleasure having those moments. And honestly, my dad's a hoarder, so those tapes are probably still in my basement somewhere. So I gotta find those and see if I can find them. But I remember when we were there, like I would always ask, like I go into your office, and I'd ask you some of the craziest questions. I remember one time I asked you something about like, did dogs go to heaven or something like that? I was always asking you questions. So for the next few moments, we're just going to have some questions and just chat back and forth. But I want to start with probably the easiest one. And I was wondering if you could share with me and for everybody listening, if you could share your story with us.
When I was in Campbellsville, that was the first church that I pastored. I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I was so young and so dumb and so many things. I was 23 years old when I went there to pastor. And what kind of amuses me thinking about that is that you and I sat in that office. I was way closer to your age when you were about 9 years old than I was to most of the other people that sat in there. But I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed the time with you, but I also enjoyed the time with them. And I've done a lot of funerals for those people that sat in that office with me every day. They would come and hang out and visit, and that's been kind of given me a multi-generational view, I guess, of the church. But I left there after about 3 years. I went down to Tennessee and pastored out in Northwest Tennessee for about 12 years. Had our 2 children down there, and then we moved home, and we've been back here in Kentucky for about 5 years. And life is really, really good. It's incredible the things that God has allowed me to be a participant in as far as kingdom work and as far as the ministry. And that's not at all because I'm worthy of it. It's been an incredible ride so far. Overseeing a jail ministry, for example, I'm very, very excited about our jail ministry that the Lord allows us to be a part of. Working with the recovery community here in our county has been incredible. I just marvel all the time at the things that I see God doing, and that He is allowing me to just be a witness to those things. It's more than I could have asked for. It really is.
Out of curiosity, so you said that was the first church you pastored. Do you remember the first sermon you delivered?
No, and I probably hope nobody else does either. I look back and I think, oh my God. Not that I'm a great preacher now, but I just think, preaching is one of those things that you learn to do it by doing it. And the Holy Spirit helps, no doubt. He gives us that education, but it's an education in the doing of it. And so I think back and I think, oh, there's just no telling. There's no telling. But those were kind people, and I appreciated their patience with me.
Wow. I only asked that because I think it's funny. My first sermon, I preached on the topic of gossip, and I remember I had a friend of mine. He's a pastor. I had him look over my sermon, and he warned me. He's like, "This is a great outline. Like, it's a great start." And I was like, "It's a great start. I feel like I can go 40 minutes off of this." And it was like 2 pages, and
Yeah.
I got up there and preached it, and I was done in 7 minutes. I was like, what do I do now? So I think it's always funny to hear those stories.
I can actually remember the first time I preached anywhere. It was at the home church that I attended when I became a Christian. And I was kind of like you. I thought, man, I'm going to have to watch it. And I talked for 8 minutes. And I told them everything I knew twice in 8 minutes. What's funny is now I was preaching a revival back at that church a few months ago, and maybe a couple years ago now. And one of those ladies there, she said, "Do you remember your first sermon?" And I said, "Yeah, it was short, wasn't it?" She said, "Yeah. What happened to that anyway? Why can't you do it like that now?" I don't know.
That's so good. That's so good. Wow. So I asked you, one of the things I asked you was, what are you most passionate about? And this is what I love about you. You're very detailed and very like your brain like gives me headaches because you're so wise and smart. So yeah, you send back this like long, profound thing, and I've read it probably like 20 times, and I honestly, like, I'm looking at it and I'm like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. So I'm going to let you share. You said you've been talking a lot, or you've been thinking a lot about the cultural shifts of the last decades and how they finally brought us back to leaving us absolute bankruptcy where worldview is concerned. And I think time is right for a coming awakening for younger men and women. So I'm just going to give the floor to you and let you chat about that. And I'm going to sit back and take some notes on my phone and learn from you for a minute.
This is something that's an ongoing matter of prayer for me. I've been thinking about this a whole lot. I've been praying as I've seen some things happening in our world. I'm concerned as a Christian, as a human being living through these strange times, as a pastor, and also as a father, or maybe even particularly as a father, because my children are growing up in this generation that is, I think, going to bear the brunt in the biggest way for that bankruptcy of worldview, or that spiritual bankruptcy that we see in the world. I think our culture, our American culture, has finally gotten somewhere that we started off to get to several decades ago. And we've become pretty thoroughly secularized as a culture in general. And I think we watched that happen in Europe. I think we watched that happen even, as far as away as like Australia. And these are sort of Western-minded places. This isn't like looking off to the Far East or even to the former Soviet bloc of nations. These are nations and cultures not all that unlike ours, but we saw them become secularized, where all things that had a spiritual bent, or especially a biblical basis to them, sort of became non grata, so to speak, no longer welcome in the public thinking. And I think for a long time we believed that wouldn't really happen in America because people were different here. And they probably were 20 or 30 years ago, but as things have shifted farther and farther in that direction, I'm sorry, I'm getting notifications on my computer while I'm talking, dings like that. But as things have shifted farther and farther in that direction, I think we're starting to realize that this was no utopia we were on our way toward. This was something that's pretty stark, and it's barren. And it leaves people with a lot of difficulties. I was just sharing about that in a sermon I preached up in Newark at the camp meeting in Newark, Ohio, a couple weeks ago. I've got some statistics just on the top of my head here, and these should be pretty easily verifiable. If somebody just wants to Google this and find it through the National Institutes of Mental Health. If I'm not mistaken, I think that from the year about 1999 or 2000 to about 2015 or 16, we see an increase in the rate of suicide by about 30%. That's pretty dramatic. It's the third leading cause of death for individuals 15 to 24 years old. It's the fourth leading cause of death for individuals 10 to 14 years old. That's incredible to me. That's incredible. I believe, and I hope I've got this right, I believe something like 31.9% of American teens, according to the National Institute of Mental Health, have some kind of clinically diagnosable anxiety disorder. Well, that's pretty profound. 3.2 million 12 to 17 year olds have experienced a major depressive episode. That's more than just having the blues, getting down, broke up with a girlfriend or boyfriend. A major depressive episode in the last 12 months. More than doubling just general mental health disorders across the board in this generation I'm talking about over the last decade. Now, my question is, what is driving that? What's behind it? There's something going on here, and I think that it's easy for us to point to symptoms and mistake them for the causes. I think we could point to drug addiction and drug culture as part of that. Is that a cause, or is it maybe it's a symptom? And I think that's probably more in the line of being a symptom. Sometimes I ask that question and people will say something like this. I say, oh, it's those video games. They're playing too many video games and they don't have enough chores to do. Well, maybe that's a part of something, and I'm not saying those things don't matter, but I am saying that somewhere along the line that it's got to be bigger than that. It's bigger than that. And the thing that it's bigger than that about is that this is a generation that has been engineered to have no spiritual outlook on life. There's no fixed reference point. There's no place that they look to and say, this is a place that I know is truth, and so that I can navigate by that. All their stars are wandering, and that's a problematic reality. And so I'm concerned about the shift in our culture. I'm concerned about what we see that mean. I had a conversation the other day with a family member of mine, is my niece, and she and I had gone hiking together. And I called her up and I said, let's go hiking. And she's always game for that. She's good company on a trail, so we went walking together. She's 20 years old, by the way, so she's in the generation that I'm talking about. Actually, she'll be 20 next month. But she said something to me as we were leaving, as we were on our way back home from after we'd hiked. She said, a friend of mine and I were talking about you the other day. And she said, we said that we envy you. And I said, oh, really? Why in the world? I'm thinking, somebody in the prime of life looking at somebody middle-aged like me, what do they have to envy? And she said, well, what we said we envy is that you have this ability to believe in something so strongly. And I said, this isn't a superpower. It's not anything that comes from me. It's just about having something to believe in. And she just kind of said, I don't know, maybe that's it. But I just wish that I had something like that. Now, my niece, she wasn't raised to share my worldview. And I'm not trying to throw stones of, recrimination against her parents or anything, but she just came from a different background. She did. And I said, well, let's talk about that for a minute. Let me ask you a few questions. You can tell me what you believe, and we'll work our way through that. You can help me to understand what it is that you think is true, and let's see where that leaves you. And she said, okay. And so I said, well, let me ask questions and you can answer them. I said, where do you think you come from? How do you think you get here on this planet? How do you think your life comes about? What in the way back, what brings you about and puts you here and now? And her answer was pretty much what you'd expect from somebody growing up in a very secularized generation, just random chance plus time and, it just, and matter and energy. And that's where she came from. She believed nothing personal in that at all. No creative effort by God at all. There's just, just sort of the universe exploded into being, and just through astronomical chance, here she is. And I said, oh, okay, all right. I said, that's an honest answer, and I understand why you think that. That's what you've been raised to believe. I said, but here's the thing. I said, when we believe a thing, anything that we really believe in, anything we buy into, it's going to have a cost associated with that. If I believe something, it's going to cost me something somewhere, right? I mean, the strongest convictions that I have should cause me to have to pay some consequences for that. I have a price to pay based on what I believe at a foundational level. And I said, so here's the thing. I said to her, so you're going to have some cost to pay for what you believe. And I wasn't even talking about eternal things. I meant things about in the here and now, in the worldview. And I said, for example, the question that follows that is this, and know this. How you answer the next few questions I'm going to ask you have to be cohesive with your first premise. Your first premise being that you come from nothing with any intentionality. You come from nothing that created you specifically. You're just the product of time and matter and random chance. I said, so my next question is this, what is it that gives you purpose? Where does your purpose come from? And she said, I really don't know. I don't know what my purpose is. She says, I guess I get to kind of just come up with it, for my own life, for my own self. And we batted that back and forth a little bit, and she couldn't quite get a strong handle on that. What gives her objective purpose? It was all relative and subjective. And I said, okay. I said, here's the thing. I said, what's hard about that is that there's a question that's kind of like a twin to that. It goes right with it, and it's hard for us not to get away from. The other question is this: what is it that gives you value? Purpose and value, if as much as we might not want this to be the case, the truth is that we are going to wrestle with it in our lives. We're going to naturally associate our value with our purpose. What value do I have is always based on answering the question, what purpose do I have? I said, so what is it that gives you any value at all? Do you see any value at all to your life? And so that was a problematic one for her to be trying to answer about what gave her objective value. And the reason that's so important to have objective value is because if you don't have objective value, any sense of value you have, somebody can come along and talk you out of it. Somebody can come along and make you feel like all your values bled away because you didn't meet up to something that they thought was. Anyway, so we talked about that a little bit. I said, now, I said, how about this? What about the question of what you should be doing with your life, or what you should not be doing with your life? About morality, for example. Here, tell me about morality. What do you think about that? And she said, well, here's where we're probably going to differ. And I said, well, so we've already gotten to where we differ. I said, but it's okay. I said, but what you tell me you believe has to build on what you've already said. You've told me this is how you got here. You've told me you're not sure what your purpose in life. You told me that your only value that you're sure about, you think it comes from your own thinking, but it's not objective, it's only subjective. I said, now where does your morality come from? And she said, well, I feel like this is truth. She said, I feel like I just make up my own moral code as I go, and I try to be a good person. And I said to her, well, you have to understand, first of all, that you don't even have, the word good is useless, because you've not even given me any idea of what good means. Good necessarily means it corresponds to some objective value that defines what goodness is. You don't even have that. But you're telling me that you're going to create your own morality, you're going to write it for yourself, and you're just going to be a good person. I said, okay, all right. If that's what you're going to do, but you're telling me you came up with your own morality. Now, what'll happen somewhere along the line, and probably already has, but it will somewhere, if not before, it will come, when you'll eventually look at somebody and say to them, here's what you should be doing, or here's what you should not be doing. And at that point, you're imposing your own just self-created morality on somebody else and expecting them to live by it, and you give them absolutely no reason to do that. I said to her, you probably feel like I do that to people. when I'm preaching the gospel, when I'm talking about the scripture, that I'm trying to impose my morality on other people. I said, it's really not the primary focus of what I'm doing, but at least I have this going for me. I didn't tell you right a minute ago that I just made it up. And you're telling me that that's where you come from. And again, I can't be angry at her. This is something I need to say. I can't be angry at her for having the mentality that she's been given her whole life, right? And then we got on to the question beyond that. I said, and where are you going to when this is all over and done with? And she said, I guess I'll just be dead. I guess I'll just be gone. And I said, so you're telling me basically that you come from nothing, really. You're on your way to nothing. You don't know what gives you any purpose. You don't know what your purpose is in being alive. You don't know where your value comes from. And you really don't know what you're supposed to be doing while you're here. Right? Almost 1 in 3 in her generation have a clinically diagnosable anxiety disorder. 3.2 million of them are suffering major depressive episodes per year. Mental health across the board for that generation has doubled in the last decade. What's driving that? It's not video games. That may be a part of it. It's not even the drug epidemic. That's another symptom of it. The truth is that we have a generation that we've pulled the rug out from under them. They have no spiritual foundation to build on. But I think more and more they're starting to look for answers. I think more and more I'm having these conversations with people who seem like they really are not just being combative, but they want to know, do you know something that I can believe in? Do you have any idea? I told her a story. And I've told this to a couple of people along the way in conversations like this. It was about the time when I lived in Tennessee, and I was driving a school bus when I lived in Tennessee. And it was something I did just kind of on the side. And I remember one particular hot afternoon. I was so glad to be getting home. Those school buses down there were not air conditioned, and so I was just getting home. It was so hot, and I pulled my school bus around my driveway and was backing it in. And just a brief flash, I saw something in the mirror. My son had I guess gotten away from his mother, and he had run out the door of our house, and he had run out to meet me on the school bus. And he was just a little fella, I don't know, 5, 6 years old. I'm not sure exactly how old he was, but he came running out to the school bus to meet me, and of course he ran right up to the side of it with it still moving. And I just happened to see him, and I was on the brakes, and I stopped, and it kind of scared me, one of those moments. And I called him up, and I said, come on. I said, come here and let's talk for just a minute. And I said, you need to know something. I have to tell you this because it's important for you to know it. I said, the school bus it doesn't know the difference between you and a rock in the driveway. Doesn't know the difference between you and a big dirt clod in the driveway. It doesn't have any means by which to tell the difference between you and one of those things, and it will run over you just as easy as it would one of those things. It would run over you and end your life and put an end to you, and it wouldn't think the least bit about that. It wouldn't grieve over that. It wouldn't worry about that at all. I said, but here's the thing, son, that you have working for you. You have something in your favor here, and it's this, that your father's driving this school bus. And while it may not know the difference between you and a rock, I surely do. And as long as I can see you out there, as long as I know where you are, and as long as I'm aware, I'm not going to let anything, but I don't want you to run out here by the school bus anymore. I was trying to get that idea across to him. But to come back to my niece and to others I've had this conversation with from this generation, they really are positioning themselves where they have been raised to believe. I think it's not so much what they're doing as what they've been raised to believe. The whole universe is like a school bus. It's running over them, and nobody's behind the wheel. Nobody's driving this thing. Nobody's seeing this. They have no concept of a father who cares about them, who loves them, who created them, brought them into the world, gives to them objective purpose, connects that with value. There's a morality based on being the man or woman that God created you to be, and so that you can go into an eternity that He intends for you that is more than just this natural physical life. And so when we take those things away from the young men and women of this generation, friend, I'm not at all surprised at what we see happening to this generation as far as mental health goes, as far as suicide goes, as far as drug use and drug addiction goes. I mean, you lump all that together, and it's a pretty stark picture. Now, here's the good news. The best part of that, I think, is that I'm finding that I get to have more and more of these conversations where I'm talking to somebody from this generation who's saying, do you know what I can believe in? Do you know what there is? And it's not like let's have an argument here. It's about like, well, I'll take some convincing. I'll take some questions that have to be answered. Not so much interested in being preached to, but explain this to me, how this all works. And so I think we're really at a prime point where God could bring about an awakening. An awakening is more than what we sometimes talk about in the church when we talk about a revival. A revival is when God's people get all energized, and I'm not discredit. It's a wonderful thing when you have genuine Spirit-sent revival of the church. That's incredible. But when I look back through some periods in history and I see some awakening moments where the whole culture said, hold on a minute, we're going to have to get our feet back on some solid spiritual ground. And there was a return to some things that they had let go by the wayside, and they were willing to pick those things back up. I think we may be coming to a time where there can be another awakening. I think there will be some costs associated with that. And this is what I keep having in conversation with people. There's some costs that will be associated with an awakening coming to our culture. There's the cost that God has to pay, right? God has to pay for that. He has to fund the bigger part of that. But the best news is that He's already done so. He's done that in Christ. He's not held out His bid on us. He's not saying, I'm not going to pay until you pay. No, God has already given His part in everything that it will require for men and women to get their feet on the ground and to have their lives radically transformed. God has done that. There's what the world has to pay also. The world itself has to come to a place where it's becoming just tired and sick and just a little nauseated by its own self-indulgence. And believe it or not, I think that that's actually beginning to happen. I think we're really seeing signs that in a culture out here, that what we're looking at is men and women who are realizing that the pleasurable season of sin has come to its end, and they're nauseated. They're finding nothing that's satisfactory. There's nothing that's even all that interesting to the flesh anymore. It's just more and more and more of the same. And I think that they're at a place where they're just getting tired of it. And I think that just that fatigue, that tiredness, that nausea toward it is part of the price that the world has to pay. But then there's another part. And there's the part of this that the church has to pay. And this is the part that's a variable for me. I'm just not sure if we can do it. I'm just not sure if we in the church can be what we need to be and do what we need to do to see this awakening come. I think we're going to have to maybe trade in some traditions to understand the difference between sacred tradition and preferential tradition. Some things are sacred and we do because we must do them. Some things it's our way of doing stuff and we just like it that way. I think that it may be that God will call us to abandon some of those things and be able to step out again and meet the world where it really is, and not just hide in our churches and say, if they want to know, let them come in here and ask it. We're going to have to do better than that. And just, I don't know, I've been thinking through some of those things along the way and just wondering what it is that we need to do to see that awakening come. I think that there's a starving generation out there that's starting to want some answers, and I think we'd better be ready. This is our moment. If we blow it, I don't know what will happen. A generation that'll be almost entirely lost. That's mind-boggling to think of. But anyway, you asked the preacher a question, and I have yammered on forever about it.
Yes, so good. You talked a little bit about depression or suicide, and I've been thinking about this a lot lately. And I actually wrote something. I guess it was last week. I stayed up to probably like 3 a.m. So I just felt like God was downloading me this stuff about depression, and I really felt like two of the things that came to mind with depression and suicide were that it seems to start somewhat with loneliness, and that loneliness is a drug that no one's talking about. because everybody can get lonely, right? I mean, we looked at, help me remember, is it Elijah in a tomb after he just had that crazy miracle? Yeah,
Absolutely.
and he's running from Jezebel in fear. Yeah, so like I thought about that, and then I was like, well, okay, well, loneliness then turns into depression, and I was like, well, okay, what about depression? And then I thought about it, and I was like, depression ultimately, if we're not careful, leads to suicide. And I began to look at the word suicide and where it came from. And it was interesting to me. I don't know if you know the history of suicide. Have you heard the history of suicide before?
Not sure exactly where you're going, so please tell me and I'll.
So I was doing some research, and the word suicide is called the Werther effect. Have you heard that term before?
No.
So in 1774, there was a man named Goethe, I think that's how you say his name. He came out with a book called The Sorrows of Young Werther. And the book tells the story of a man. He's in love with a woman, and the woman eventually, the story tells her that the woman's not in love with him. So to cope with that feeling, he goes out and he buys a pistol and he shoots himself. And what happened is that people read the book and they began to copy the behavior, and it became the normal. So they eventually had to ban the book, and I haven't even looked. I thought it was interesting, and I was like, I wonder if you can still buy the book. I haven't looked at that, but I thought it was interesting that it was called that, and that's where it seems to be. That's where the term came from and where it came from. But if we look at it, and what you touched on a little bit is that even with our worldviews, is the problem is that we have too much in the frame for only ourselves, right? We're only concerned with ourselves, and really, I don't know if you agree with this. I believe that the God of our nation in the U.S. is ultimately self. If you disagree with me, I'm a racist. The top songs on our music are about self. Just a lot of self. And that's what, it was interesting that you were talking about that, and just so it made me come back to that, what God was downloading in me. I don't know if you want to, I don't know if you want to touch on anything there.
You were talking about how in our culture now, the God of this culture is the God of self. And I think that's pretty consistent with a biblical worldview. I really do. There's this passage that comes to my mind in Mark, I believe, where Jesus is just sharing in the Last Supper with his disciples. And I might be wrong about which gospel this is in, but I was thinking it was in Mark. And just as they finish that meal, Jesus is trying to give them some final words, thoughts, wisdom before he is taken from them to be crucified. And he just says, at one point at the end of that, he says the ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. In other words, Jesus is saying the ruler of this world is coming. He's coming for this conflict. He's coming for this showdown. But I want you to know that I'm not letting him get his hook into me. I'm not going to make this about self. And he goes from there. They go into the Garden of Gethsemane. And I've always found that to be one of the most captivating portions of Scripture. Of course, we talk much about the cross, as we should. There was a victory that was won the night before that makes it all possible. And I'm not trying to just repreach sermons to you here, but it really ignites my imagination and makes me just stand back and praise to God. Jesus goes there into that garden, having brought the disciples along. He says, "You just wait here." He takes Peter, James, and John, and they go a little farther with him. And he says, "Just stay here and pray with me." And I always find that incredible, because this is the God of heaven and earth, who's never needed anything before, saying to them, "I need you to pray for me." Isn't that amazing? Isn't it beautiful and mind-blowing? But I need you to pray for me. And then he goes away and he prays. And you know how he prays? He prays and says, if there's any other way, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. He comes back to Peter, James, and John, and they're sleeping. And he says to them, he says, arise, wake up. He says, I need you to pray. Watch and pray. Because the flesh, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. I think I've been reading that wrong my whole life. I think he was saying, I think I used to think that he was saying to them, I know your spirits are willing, but your flesh is weak. Aaron, he was talking about himself. He was saying, this spirit that's in me is willing, but this flesh is weak. And tonight I am battling not with the enemy, not with the ruler of this world who's coming, but tonight I'm battling with self. And I'm trying to submit this flesh to the will of God. I need you praying for me. And I think that's absolutely true. I think that that this sense of selfishness, self-centeredness, the self-life is the best translation for what the New Testament usually means when we find the word flesh. It is to live out of self. We've been called to something other than that. We've been called into something better by not being a part of that. Anyway, sorry, you just kind of you hit my button right there talking about that, because that's been on my mind a whole lot.
Yeah, so good. Hey, keep going if you want to.
I
can listen all day.
It's all right. I talk too much, but I really think that's right. I think that's one of the problems that comes often with depression. Depression is loneliness, and then loneliness, then it does something else. One of the best treatments for depression is meaningful connection with other people. But depression will actually drive you, by its nature, more than loneliness. It'll drive you into isolation, where all there is self. All there is continual pondering over your own griefs and pondering over your own shortcomings, and it's just a continual assessment of self. And sometimes it's skewed. It's not even based in reality. It gets its vision distorted, but without any outside referent, there's no way of correcting that. And so, yeah, I think we see depression growing in folks who have no concept of an outside reference. And so, it's a devastating thing to watch that happen to somebody. I hate that. I really do. I hate that. I feel like one of the things that the church has been so weak on for a long time, but getting better at. And I want to laud what God is doing in His church in recent years a little bit here. I think we're getting better at helping people who are struggling with this. One of the things that, my wife has struggled with anxiety and depression for a long time. I mean, it's been a perennial battle for her. She's dealt with those things. That's not always been easy. And that's not always been easy, especially involved in ministry in the church. There have been some times when it was very hard. There have been some things that were said that were altogether unkind. But it has allowed her to be a spokesperson for people who struggle with that. And to be able to show the world that, hey, look, there's ministry that can happen here to folks who go through this kind of thing. And I think we're seeing that across the board, the church is getting better at being able to bring the love of Christ into those circumstances. So I'm pretty excited about it. That's a good thing. That's a real good trend.
Yes. That's so good. We could talk about that all day, the subject. But I wanted to shift gears real quick, because this is one of my favorite things to do. I love getting advice from people. In fact, I blow up your phone all the time asking you for advice and how to do stuff. What are your thoughts? I'm always doing that. So I was curious, what is the best advice you've ever received?
Well, I mean, I want to say something super spiritual here and say, there's something about becoming a Christian. Of course, those things. But I think we're talking about something else besides that, right? I can't believe I was like 35 years old before anybody ever said this to me, and I thought, I felt a little cheated. I felt like, why am I only hearing this now? Somebody told me when I was about 35 years old that what other people think of you is none of your business. And I thought, well, shoot, why didn't somebody tell me that when I was 15? Because I feel like in so many ways I've lived my life worried about what other people think of me. Instead of just saying, that's none of my business, I need to live just for the glory of God and for the approval of the Lord. And, those are kind of the things that in the back of your head, but we've got this addictive need to measure ourselves through other people's eyes. I was at a class reunion. I graduated from high school. Let me think, it's been a while now, but a few years ago, I was at my 20th high school reunion. And I had one of those moments that it was just kind of like, wow. I was there, and this fella came by, and we went to we sat like an aisle apart in first grade. We've been in school together all the way through school, always in school together. And he came by walking by, and he looked at me and he said, "Did I go to school with you? I don't remember you at all." And at first I was a little bit offended. I come from Powell County, Kentucky. It's a little place, you know what I'm saying? It ain't like we had thousands of people in our high school. We went to a little rural elementary school together. There was one first grade class. There was one of every grade there. Then we went on to middle school. We were in high school. And I thought, what do you mean you don't remember me? And then I stopped, and it was like the greatest joy just broke over my spirit. And I thought, isn't that just amazingly wonderful? The truth is, people are almost always way too caught up in what they got going on to even pay any attention to you. Most of the time that we're spending our lives worried about what other people think, it's just a sham. It's just a mirage. It doesn't even matter. They don't care. Don't worry about that. Just live to please Christ, and everything else will be all right. Right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So it makes me wonder, if you could go back in time, would that be the same advice you give yourself at a younger self?
At a younger age, I think that it would. I think so. I think more than I'd like to admit.
Wow.
I have
so good.
People pleaser. I have been somebody who's had this addictive need to win the approval of other people. And it's kind of nice to get to a point in life, and I'm not saying I'm completely over that, but it's kind of nice to be at a point kind of along the midway in life, reassessing, reevaluating now what I want my life to be about, and the purpose and the value. Again, I come back to those questions that I can't seem to get away from. What gives my life purpose is not the approval of other people. People can approve you all the way to hell, right? And what do you get for that? Hell at the end. But to say my purpose is to glorify God. That's my purpose in life. My value comes from the fact that I've been created in His image with the potential to be somebody who glorifies God. What should I do with my life? What is all the morality that I'm supposed to be? It's about glorifying God through the Lord Jesus Christ. And it brings me back to that, and I keep saying this to myself. The approval or disapproval of other people is not where life is. It's not what it is. And so that's a little stress reducer for me. So I think that's advice I'd like to go back and give myself when I was about 15 or 20 years old, and say, stop it.
So good. I want to play a little game with you real quick. I'm going to give you a word. And from that word, I want to see if you can give me a sermon from it. You can give me a text. You don't have to be specific, like Matthew, whatever, just premise and what you want to say about it. But the first word I want to give you is the word food.
Food?
Food.
Okay, there is a scripture, there is a verse in the book of Proverbs that says, to the hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. I think that we're finding that, and so I just leads me right back into a lot of the things that I was just saying there, and I'm sorry about that, but the idea, what will the hungry heart eat? What will it take in? It'll take in all kinds of bitterness. It'll take in all kinds of things that are not meant for food. But if we can come to a place where we can give people what is real, what is genuine, what is meant for food. There was a book written by C.S. Lewis, rather. C.S. Lewis One of my favorite preachers is Ravi Zacharias, and he references this book. I read the book a couple of times. But C.S. Lewis tells this story about a man. It's called The Pilgrim's Regress. And it's about a man named John who is off looking for his own. And it's kind of autobiographical for C.S. Lewis a little bit here. And he's talking about how he, his own spiritual journey, his spiritual pursuit. And he says he becomes on this sort of, it's kind of almost like Pilgrim's Progress. There's a lot of allegory there, but in Pilgrim's Regress, this man is entrapped in this mountain. And the mountain is called the Spirit of the Age. And he's bound there and he's put in chains there. And when they finally come along to feed him something, they bring him an egg, and they bring him a glass of milk. And he drinks the milk, and he's so hungry, and he drinks the milk down, and he says, the guard who brings that to him says, "What do you think of that?" And he says, "This milk is so good, so good." And he laughs and he says, "Just the secretions of a cow. No difference between that and its urine." And they said, and then I won't even tell you what he said about the egg, right? What is the egg like? And he said that reason came riding in to save him, to deliver him from the spirit of the age. At that moment, reason came in, and reason said to that one who kept him bound, "Sir, you lie. You lie because you do not know the difference between what nature meant for nourishment and what nature meant for refuse." I think we have a world today, a generation that does not know the difference between what is nourishing to the soul and spirit and what is only refuse, right? And so to the hungry, every bitter thing is sweet, and they will take in just about anything if they think there might be some nourishment in it at all. But we need to be there, pointing the way, saying, "Here is truth, and truth is good for your inward man." I'm sorry, did that go on too long? Was that more than you wanted me?
No, that's perfect. Wow, that was that was so good. I didn't know what you were going to come up with food. I thought that might be a difficult one. I thought you might.
You know, I think about food a lot, man. So that's...
I thought you might go with Elijah and getting fed by ravens or something like that. I didn't dream there was a verse in Proverbs. I should have known. Oh man,
loathes the honeycomb. That's the first part of that verse. The satisfied soul loathes the honeycomb, but to the bitter soul, to the hungry soul, every bitter thing is sweet. Anyway, that's the whole, and I can't tell you exactly where that is in Proverbs, but it's somewhere in there.
Yeah, I'm gonna Google it.
Okay, all right, you look it up. It's not in there. You're gonna put a little editorial note somewhere. Totally made that up. Oh, it's in there.
What about the word cloud?
Cloud.
C-L-O-U-D, cloud.
That takes me to Hebrews for sure. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. And he goes on from there. Think about that. In the 11th chapter of Hebrews, the writer pretty much takes us through a Cliff's Notes version of the whole scripture. He pulls the stories of these great men and women of faith out, and all these that have done these things. They've stopped the mouths of the lions. They've gone through all these things, and some of them didn't accept deliverance. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. And he goes on. He says, "What more should we say about them? That being the case, all these that went before who were not made complete, the story of redemption was not finished in their day." Why? Because God was unwilling to not include you and me in that, right? Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let me not misquote this now. That's really on my mind. I want to get this just right. And so this is Hebrews chapter number 12, the beginning of that, right at the end of that. Since we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. I like that. Of the throne of God, sorry. That cloud of witnesses, I want you to think about that with me. Some of the cloud we read about It's those people mentioned there, others in the cloud. We don't read in the scripture, but we've known them. I think about Ruth Ann Jenkins, your aunt, who's been a great friend of mine. I loved Ruth Ann so dearly. She was just a Christian spirited person. You know what she is for me? She's one of those people who lives in the cloud for me. She's one of those people that I can look to and think about saying, keep going. Don't give up now. The finish line is ahead. Don't allow yourself to be turned back. Don't let yourself get ensnared. Don't get bogged down in anything. Keep going on. Keep going on. Keep going on. There are others for me. I'm sure there are others for you, but they're that cloud of witnesses. There's my sermon on clouds, Aaron.
So good. So good. Okay. Just out of curiosity, because you mentioned C.S. Lewis again a second ago, does he have, like, what is your favorite book? I love to read, so.
My favorite book by C.S. Lewis?
Just in general. You can give me both, actually.
Well, my favorite book by C.S. Lewis is Mere Christianity. I mean, it's just a wonderful basic worldview of, looking at what a Christian should how a Christian should see life and understand truth. I tell you the truth, have you read that one, by the way? Mere Christianity?
I have not. I've not read that one yet.
I recommend it to you. The first couple chapters are going to be a little slow, but it's going to pick up after that. It really is. So I recommend that. However, my favorite book, I know I just talked about The Pilgrim's Regress. John Bunyan's book, classic, The Pilgrim's Progress, to me is just a constant source of I assume we're accepting the Bible here, right? We're not including the Bible on our list, because I feel like you and I'd both be blasphemers if we didn't say that, but that was our favorite. But other than that, I'm going to go with John Bunyan, the Pilgrim's Progress. I really think John Bunyan was blessed of the Spirit to be able to pull together so much of the scripture and lay that out in such a metaphor, powerful stuff. If I'm not mistaken, when the early colonists came to this country, especially those that came for religious reasons, they came with two books, the Bible and the Pilgrim's Progress. They found that to be such an effective teaching tool.
That's interesting. I did not know that. I picked up I worked at Lifeway for a little bit, and I picked up the Pilgrim's Progress one day when it was on sale. So I'm going to have to dig those out and read both of those, now that you spoke so highly of them.
I highly recommend those. I don't think that'll be a waste of your time at all. Not even.
Well, I'm definitely going to pull that out. But I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your day and chatting with me, and I've been blessed by our conversation, and man, I've learned so much from you. And I could not let you go without saying, to reiterate what I told you, gosh, I guess it's earlier this year, maybe, or late last year. I don't remember when I was at your church. But I really think a lot about you, and you're one of my favorite people. I'm not just saying that. I've learned so much from you, and you're one of the people that I look up to a lot. I know I'm in Campbellsville now, so I'm not that far away from you. So you call me up, I'm there in a minute. But I just want you to know that I love you, and I'm one of your biggest fans and cheerleaders. And I care a whole lot about you. And if there's ever a question that I have theologically or anything, you're one of the first people I reach out to, because you are just so much full of wisdom. Like, my brain hurts just thinking about how much you know half the time.
I'm not all that wise or smart, but I will say that humbled me greatly, and I cannot tell you how much that means to me. I am at a point in life where, there's a point where you have to come face to face with the fact that the kingdom of God endures forever. I will not endure forever here. And you start to see that what God is doing is always bigger than one person or even one generation. And sometimes I think for us as Christians, as we get older, and even in ministry as we get older, and we think, nobody's taking this as serious as they should, and this younger generation is all that said. But here's the thing: I can look at somebody like you, Aaron, and I can say, you know what, God, you are teaching me the same lesson that you were teaching Elijah. And you mentioned Elijah a while ago on the mountain, and then his depression that followed, and he goes up on that mountain, and God, I alone am left. I'm the only one. We can kind of get into that thinking sometimes if we're not careful. But God said to him, after showing him fires and earthquakes and all those kinds of things, he just comes and he whispers, "Now tell me, really, Elijah, what's going on with you?" And he says, "Lord, there's nobody. This thing is ending with me." He says, "Elijah, look here. I've got all these others who've never bowed the knee to Baal. I've got all these others that I'm working in, and I'm bringing them along." And I look at somebody like you, Aaron, and I think, isn't that incredible what God is doing? To get to hear you come, and I got to hear you preaching as a 9-year-old behind the pulpit, giving me a message on how to get saved so that I could go to the altar. But to get to sit back and to listen to you preach in earnest was pretty incredible for me. That's a pretty poignant moment in my own life, and to get to see how this is all bigger than me. And it brings me to a place. It brings me to a place spiritually. By the way, after that moment with Elijah, we see him on another mountain at another place, far removed in time from then and there. Well, not from then at least. He shows up on a mountain with Jesus and Moses, and Peter and James and John are there also, right? And I just kind of wonder, this kingdom, this thing that God was working on, that he saw ending with him. I'm the only one. There's not very many coming on, Lord. I just kind of wonder if the reason he got included, part of the reason he got included there with Jesus, is so that God could say to him, "Elijah, did I not tell you that I was bringing this thing about just exactly the way that I said I was going to, and now you're seeing the fulfillment of it all?" I kind of feel that way a little bit when I get to see somebody like you in ministry and preaching the word and sharing the truth. I feel like, God, you're just showing me that you got this thing well in hand, and that while I can look with concern upon a generation that seems to have no foundation, you are finding a remnant even in that generation. And I pray that remnant just expands and grows. But I really, really, really want you to know how encouraged I am when you text me and say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" or "Let's talk about that." It is good for me to get to hear that and to see that too. So I don't want you to think that what you're talking about is a one-way street. I want you to know I'm your fan and your cheerleader too, okay?
I appreciate that so much. So just to end, give a couple of questions here that we talked about. You talked about the people listening. There's a cost in believing in something, and the questions really are, for everybody that's listening, what do you believe in, number one? And then, where is your purpose? What is your value? Like, where is your value? And then, where are you going ultimately? And what you value, what value you have is based on what you discover your purpose is. So I think that's incredible.
Is another one of those costs that comes from those things. But yeah, you're right. That's it. I think those things must be cohesive. They have to fit together, and they flow out of that first question. If you come from nothing, everything else is awfully hard to come by after that. It's just air.
Yeah. So good. Thank you so much for taking time out and chatting with us. And I know everyone listening will have been blessed by this, because you are such a blessing. Thank you so much, and I look forward to doing this again. We gotta just do this all the time.